In 1977, a quiet London home became the center of one of the most disturbing paranormal cases in history. What haunted the Hodgson family went beyond poltergeists. It spoke, it moved, and it knew. This isn't just a haunting. This is something that found a way in. Welcome to the truth behind the Enfield Horror. It started with a knock. Not the kind you'd hear at the door when a visitor arrives, but a low, deliberate thud against the wall, hollow and purposeful, like a message tapped out by something with no voice left to speak. It echoed through the small council house in Enfield, London, just after midnight on August 30th, 1977. The Hodgson family, Peggy and her 4 children, Margaret, Janet, Johnny, and Billy, were getting ready for bed when the first signs of the unnatural began to seep through their lives. Peggy thought it was the pipes. The house was old and modest, like many of the post-war buildings in the Brimsdown area, and sounds in the night were not unusual. But her daughter Janet insisted something was wrong. The 11-year-old stood frozen in her room, her gaze fixed on the chest of drawers that had just moved by itself, sliding a good few inches across the wooden floor as if nudged by unseen hands. "Stop mucking about," Peggy snapped, trying to steady her nerves. But then it happened again. Right in front of her, the heavy furniture shifted violently toward the door, almost blocking it, as if trying to trap them inside. Peggy ran forward, grabbed the girls, and yanked the door open with trembling hands. They bolted downstairs, hearts pounding. From the safety of the kitchen, Peggy called the police. What followed over the next 18 months would become one of the most chilling and controversial cases in British paranormal history. The events at 284 Green Street were witnessed not only by the family but by neighbors, police officers, journalists, and paranormal investigators. Furniture flew, objects disappeared and reappeared, disembodied voices echoed from nowhere, and a young girl seemed to become a vessel for something far older and far darker than anyone could comprehend. The police arrived at night and did what they could. One constable, WPC Carolyn Heaps, reported seeing a chair levitate and slide across the floor in front of her. She checked for strings, for tricks, but found nothing. "It was as if it had a will of its own," she later said in her official statement. But they couldn't do much else. There were no intruders, no broken windows, nothing to arrest. The knocking continued. It grew more frequent, more insistent. Sometimes it came from the ceiling, sometimes from inside the walls. Lights flickered. Cold spots formed in the air. The children began talking of voices, low, gravelly whispers that came at night, speaking in tongues none of them understood. Paranormal investigators Maurice Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair from the Society for Psychical Research were brought in shortly after, and from that point on, the haunting was documented nearly every day. They brought tape recorders, cameras, notepads, and open minds. What they encountered defied all logic. It was Janet who bore the brunt of the activity. One night, as Gross sat across from her, she entered what he later described as a trance state. Her eyes rolled back, her limbs went rigid, and from deep within her chest came a guttural male voice, coarse and mocking. "My name is Bill," the voice growled. "I used to live here. I died in that bloody chair." The investigators later confirmed that a man named Bill Wilkins had indeed died in the house years before, in the very same room Janet now slept in. He'd passed from a brain hemorrhage while sitting in his favorite armchair. Skeptics argued that Janet was faking it, that she was a bright, attention-seeking child capable of ventriloquism and mischief. But the recordings captured something far more sinister than childhood antics. In one, Bill's voice spoke over and over, "I'm invisible. I'm in the corner. I'll stay here forever." And it wasn't just voices. Janet would often be thrown from her bed by an unseen force. On one occasion, she was captured on camera midair, her body twisted in unnatural angles, as if flung by something with incredible strength. Gross and Playfair tried to explain it logically. They examined the floorboards, tested for springs or traps. Nothing. The energy in the house was thick, electric. It seemed to pulse in waves, as if the walls themselves were breathing. The press caught wind of the story and descended on Green Street like vultures. Reporters from the Daily Mirror and BBC set up equipment, hoping to catch something sensational. And they did. One cameraman swore he saw a Lego brick float across the room and strike him in the forehead, leaving a welt. Equipment malfunctioned constantly. Film reels came back blank. Microphones recorded static and distant laughter. Despite all this, doubt remained. Some claimed the girls were staging the events, using trickery and clever setups to fool the investigators. At one point, Janet admitted to faking a few incidents, just to see if they were paying attention. But even Playfair, initially skeptical, believed the core of the case was genuine. But the question still burned. What was it? Was it really the ghost of Bill Wilkins, an old man unwilling to leave his home? Or was something far more ancient and malicious using his memory as a mask? There were nights, long, howling nights, when Janet would wake with scratches down her back, her sheets soaked with sweat. She spoke of a tall figure in her room, its face obscured by shadow, standing in the corner where the knocking always came from. It didn't move. It didn't speak. But she felt it watching her, feeding off her fear. One night, she was found sleepwalking in the street 3 blocks away, barefoot and shivering. When asked why, she only whispered, "He told me to go. He said I don't belong here anymore." The family's dog, Toby, began barking incessantly at the upstairs hallway, his hackles raised, his eyes fixed on nothing. One morning, he was found trembling under the kitchen table, whimpering like he'd been beaten. Then came the water. Dark stains began appearing on the ceiling, slowly seeping through the plaster. But they weren't from burst pipes. When Gross climbed into the attic to investigate, he found something disturbing. A child's toy chest, sealed shut with nails, wedged in a corner as if someone had tried to bury it in dust and insulation. Inside were old dolls with their eyes gouged out, yellow drawings of figures with no faces, and a diary belonging to a girl named Eliza. Someone no one in the Hodgson family had ever heard of. The last entry read, "He told me to never speak again. That if I did, he'd take my breath and keep it. I hear him in the walls now. I think he's hiding behind them." And still, the knocking continued. No matter what they did, the force remained. Exorcisms failed. Clergy came and left, unsettled and silent. The house itself seemed to reject any attempts at cleansing. Something wanted to be there. And as months passed, the entity grew bolder. On one bitter December night, as frost spread across the windows and the children huddled close together for warmth, Peggy sat at the kitchen table, exhausted and broken. Across from her sat Maurice Gross, nursing a cup of cold tea. "Whatever's in this house," he said slowly, "I don't think it ever left. I don't even think it's tied to the house." She blinked. "Then what is it tied to?" He glanced upstairs toward Janet's bedroom. His voice was barely above a whisper. "You?" Peggy froze. Gross's words hung in the air, thick and heavy. "You?" he had said. "Not the house. Not the spirit of a dead man. You?" She stared at him, her eyes wide and hollow from months of stress, sleep deprivation, and fear. "What do you mean? It's tied to me." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his worn leather satchel and pulled out a folder thick with notes, photographs, and taped transcripts. He slid a yellowing page across the table toward her. I've been cataloging everything. The noises, the activity, the voices. There's a pattern, Peggy. It's not random. She looked down at the page. It was a hand-drawn map of the house, each room labeled with tiny numbers. Red ink marked the spots where the most intense phenomena had occurred. Janet's room was practically soaked in red. So was the hallway, the stairs. But something else stood out. Gross had circled her bedroom and written origination point. I thought this thing was latching onto Janet, he continued, lowering his voice so the kids wouldn't hear. And maybe it is. But I've been thinking about something else. What if it started before Janet? Before the furniture moved? Before the knocking? She flinched as he said the word. Knocking. It hadn't stopped in weeks. She heard it in her dreams now. I know this is hard, he said gently, but did anything unusual happen before this all began? Something traumatic? Peggy's hands tightened around her cup. She thought back, first to the night the chest of drawers moved, then further. A creeping unease settled in her stomach. There was a man, she said finally, before I moved here. Gross leaned in. Go on. She hesitated. He wasn't a good man. The children never knew. He was violent, controlling, always said I didn't deserve peace. That if I ever left, he'd make sure I'd regret it forever. Gross nodded slowly. Did he ever come here? To this house? She shook her head. He died before we moved in. Car accident. Nothing suspicious. But she swallowed hard. The night before the first knock, I had a dream. He was standing in the hallway, just outside my door. He didn't say anything. He just smiled, like he knew something I didn't. They sat in silence. It suddenly made sense, in a way that frightened them both. The entity, whatever it was, seemed intelligent. It knew where to push, when to strike. It twisted emotions, deepened fears, mimicked voices. It knew their pasts. It wore their memories like masks. The next day, Janet was found with a noose fashioned from her bedsheets tied loosely around her neck. She was awake, her eyes glazed. When asked why, she said she wanted to see what it felt like, because he kept whispering that it wasn't so bad. She couldn't say who he was. She just called him the man in the corner. By then, Gross and Playfair were desperate. They began sleeping at the house in rotating shifts, documenting everything. They even left tape recorders running overnight. One morning, they played back a tape and heard something chilling, a deep breath, a dragging noise. Then, unmistakably, she let me in. I live here now. Janet denied ever saying it. Her lips didn't match the voice on the tape. Her mouth had been shut in the footage. They checked multiple angles. It wasn't ventriloquism. It wasn't a trick. It was something else entirely. One afternoon, Playfair decided to check the crawl space beneath the stairs. He'd been avoiding it. It was narrow, dark, and filled with decades of dust, but something gnawed at him. A gut feeling. As he crawled in, flashlight flickering, he saw faint scratches along the beams. At first, he thought they were marks left by rats. But they formed patterns, etchings, words, some old, some fresh, all violent. He's watching. Get out. Janet is mine. And below them, the one that chilled him to the bone. Peggy invited him. He emerged pale and trembling, eyes wide. Gross tried to reason with him, but Playfair was shaken. This isn't just a haunting, he muttered. This is a war. From that night on, the house changed. The air grew thick, heavy, almost suffocating. Shadows lingered too long. Objects didn't just move, they shattered. Janet began speaking in full paragraphs in the deep voice of Bill, telling stories about a life he couldn't have known. Specific memories, pub names, war details. The investigators verified them. Details about Bill Wilkins's life that had never been published. Still, Gross had doubts. If this entity was truly Bill, why did he sound wrong? Sometimes the voice referred to itself as Bill, other times not. One time it said its name was Fred. Another time, it called itself Grayhill. Once, disturbingly, it said, "I am the one behind all of them." The voices weren't consistent. They overlapped. They seemed staged. Not by Janet, but by something pretending to be her. Or pretending to be him. Like a puppet master yanking strings. That theory gained traction when the youngest child, Billy, began seeing a shadow figure standing just behind his sister at night. "It's tall," he said. "Taller than the ceiling. And it bends." They thought he was imagining things. Until the upstairs hallway light started flickering every night at 2:13 a.m. without fail. The bulb was changed repeatedly. The wiring was fine. But every night, same time, the flicker returned. It was like a signal. Then, a breakthrough. Peggy's mother, who had always refused to speak about her own childhood home, finally confessed something horrifying. She too had experienced strange events as a child. Scratching in the walls. Whispers through the vents. Shadows moving where there should be none. Her childhood address? Just 2 streets away from Green Street. That night, the power went out. The entire house plunged into darkness. Not just the lights, everything. No electricity. No heating. No clocks ticking. It was like the house itself had died. The family huddled together in the living room, Gross and Playfair lighting candles. The silence was oppressive. And then the walls began to knock. Not taps. Not thumps. Pounding. Violent. From every side. It was as if the house were being struck by fists the size of tree trunks. Janet screamed. The candle blew out. When the light returned, they saw it. At the top of the stairs. A figure. Not fully formed. Half in shadow, half lit. Its face seemed to ripple, shifting between features, sometimes Bill's, sometimes a stranger's, sometimes featureless entirely. Its body was long, emaciated, bent backward like a broken marionette, and it smiled. The figure didn't move. It didn't need to. Its very presence paralyzed everyone in the room. Gross couldn't breathe. Peggy instinctively pulled her children closer, shielding them with her body, though her knees threatened to give out at any moment. Playfair fumbled for the flashlight, but it sputtered and failed. For several long, agonizing seconds, the figure remained at the top of the stairs, head cocked at an unnatural angle, arms long and limp at its sides, its mouth twisted into something resembling amusement. Or hunger. Then it vanished. Not in a puff of smoke, not with a dramatic sound or bang. It simply blinked out of existence. And all at once, the power returned. The light from the bulb at the ceiling buzzed to life, revealing the stairwell now empty. The walls were still. The air, while tense, was breathable again. The spell had lifted. But the damage remained. Janet refused to sleep upstairs after that night. The family began rotating sleeping arrangements. Gross stayed most nights, unwilling to leave them alone. Playfair remained distant, though he hadn't stopped investigating. Something about what he saw had shaken his belief in the boundaries of the phenomenon. He didn't believe in demons. Not really. But this didn't fit anything. A few days later, he brought in someone new. Her name was Evelyn Markham, an independent psychic medium with a reputation for accuracy and a history of collaborating with scientists studying the paranormal. She didn't want money. She didn't ask for publicity. When she arrived at Green Street, She stood silently outside the front gate for a long time, her eyes closed, head tilted. "I can't go in yet," she said. "It's watching me through the window." Peggy looked up at the house. All the curtains were drawn. When Evelyn finally entered, she barely crossed the threshold before stopping in the hallway. Her voice was calm, measured. "There's more than one presence here," she said. "But only one of them has power. The others are like echoes trapped. I think they're victims." Janet, sitting on the bottom stair, looked up. "Victims of what?" Evelyn knelt beside her. "Of him," she whispered, glancing toward the stairs. "He's not a ghost. Not in the way we understand them. He's older." Later that evening, Evelyn held a séance. It wasn't like the dramatic performances often seen in media. There was no chanting, no candles, just silence. The family, Gross, and Playfair formed a circle in the living room. Evelyn sat with her palms up, eyes closed. For minutes, nothing happened. Then she gasped. Her breathing quickened. Her hands trembled. Her lips parted as if to speak, but instead a long, rasping inhale filled the room, like someone waking from centuries of slumber. "He doesn't want me here," Evelyn said. Her voice was different now. Distant, childlike. "He doesn't like when they fight back." Gross leaned forward. "Who is he? What does he want?" "He feeds on sorrow. He wraps himself around pain. It's his door." "His door?" Playfair echoed. "To this world. It's not the house. It's her." She pointed at Janet, who recoiled. Evelyn's body tensed as her head snapped back. Her eyes rolled white. And then she screamed, not a sound of fear, but one of agony. Blood trickled from her nose. The windows rattled. A wind blasted through the room even though all the doors were closed. The séance ended in chaos. Evelyn collapsed, barely conscious. Janet fainted. The room stank of ozone, and a crack had formed in the living room ceiling. Later, when Evelyn was calm enough to speak, she explained what she had seen. "There is a thing that lives between worlds," she said softly. "It waits for the right vessel. Janet is vulnerable because she's been broken open by trauma and fear. That thing, whatever it truly is, has followed this family for longer than you know. It moves through pain. It's clever. It pretends. It used the memory of Bill. It might even use me next. But it's not him. It never was." She left the next morning and never returned. Something shifted after that. The entity became more erratic, more desperate. Objects didn't just move, they shattered. Janet began sleep-talking in voices that weren't her own. The family would wake to find her standing in the hallway, eyes wide open, arms outstretched, murmuring things like, "He wants the door open," or, "He says there are more coming." More. Gross began researching similar hauntings. Cases where young children, particularly girls approaching adolescence, became targets of poltergeist-like activity. The common link? Trauma, grief, displacement. Each time, the force didn't seem to just haunt, it attached, like a parasite. In one case in Leeds, 1953, a 12-year-old girl named Annette was tormented by unseen forces after losing her brother in an accident. Her family reported objects flying, glass shattering, voices in the walls. Eventually, she disappeared entirely. The house was found empty, the doors locked from the inside. The last entry in her mother's journal read, "She said she was going to go with him, that he promised they'd live forever in the space behind the mirrors." When Gross visited the abandoned property, he found the bedroom mirror cracked down the center, like something had pushed out from inside. Back at Enfield, the walls had begun to bleed. Not real blood, at least not by medical analysis. A thick, Reddish-brown fluid would seep through the wallpaper in Janet's room, oozing down to the floor. It stained everything it touched. They sent samples to a lab. The results were inconclusive. Organic material, but no known match. Janet's behavior deteriorated. She became withdrawn, paranoid. She refused to eat certain foods, claiming they were poisoned by the man. She drew symbols obsessively, twisted spiral shapes, always in threes, always with lines connecting them like veins. When asked what they meant, she said only, "He showed me." Then came the night of the burning door. It was early March, cold and damp. The family had taken to sleeping in the downstairs sitting room. At exactly 3:11 a.m., the door to the upstairs landing burst into flames. No source, no matches, no one was near it. The fire was extinguished quickly, but the door itself was scorched beyond repair. On the back, in the blackened wood, a new message appeared as if carved by heat. "Open the gate." The words, "Open the gate," smoldered in the charred wood for days. No matter how many times Peggy tried to scrub or sand them away, the blackened grain remained, the message embedded like a brand. Every time Janet passed that spot, she would pause and stare, sometimes mumbling something under her breath. Once, Gross caught her whispering a phrase over and over. 3 into 1. 3 into 1. 3 into 1. It wasn't a rhyme. It wasn't gibberish. He remembered the spirals she'd been drawing. 3 swirling points, always connected. Always bleeding together into one central mass. Playfair became obsessed with them. He tore apart old folklore books, digging into Celtic and pre-Roman mythology, anything that might link to Enfield's land before the council estate was ever built. And what he found chilled him. The land beneath the Brimsdown area was once home to ancient barrow fields, burial mounds predating Christianity, pagan ritual sites, druids. Some said the Romans left the land alone out of fear. There were legends of the Hollow Ones, spirits that didn't die but waited, waiting for a door to be opened again. One passage in a tattered local history book stood out. 3 paths carved into the earth, converging in shadow. When they are drawn anew, the hollow god may pass from sleep to waking. Playfair looked at Janet's spiral drawings again. The same shape. What if it wasn't a poltergeist? What if it wasn't even human? Meanwhile, Janet's condition worsened. She became violently ill at night, convulsing without cause. Doctors found nothing medically wrong. She would wake screaming, her throat raw, eyes bloodshot. She spoke in new voices now, ones that didn't even pretend to be Bill. They hissed. They snarled. One night she said, in a slow, guttural tone, "You pulled him out. You dug him up. Now you have to feed him." Gross and Peggy were barely functioning. Sleep came in fits. The children were terrified but had adapted in strange ways. Normalizing the unexplainable, Johnny had taken to drawing. The man in the corner, with crayons, casually showing Gross his sketches like it was art class. "It's not always him," Johnny said one morning. "Sometimes it's more than one. But they all wear the same face. The twisted one." When Playfair returned with his findings, he laid everything out on the table, literally. He brought old maps, Janet's drawings, and a local myth about a gate beneath the stone. The stone referred to a now demolished monolith that once stood on a hill near what was now the back garden of the Hodgson's home. "They built right on top of it," Playfair said, tapping the map. "This house wasn't just randomly haunted. It was placed on something ancient. I think the trauma in this house cracked the seal." Peggy leaned in, weary. "Seal? It wasn't just a haunting. It was a prison. And it's been opening slowly. Every night, every voice, every scream." "It's a crack in the gate." Later that night, Gross caught Janet awake, standing barefoot in the hallway again. She was writing on the wall in her own blood, fingertip torn and raw. The message was fragmented, scrawled in loops and swirls. He's almost through the walls are thin, he wants a name, he wants a voice. And then she turned to him and said, not in her own voice, but one that sounded layered, dozens speaking at once. Soon I'll walk in your skin. Gross stepped back. He didn't sleep that night. They brought in a priest the next day, Father Brennan, a reluctant man of faith who had heard whispers of the case, but never imagined it would be this bad. He arrived with holy water, prayer books, and an uneasy skepticism. Within minutes of entering, his demeanor changed. The moment he crossed the upstairs threshold, his crucifix split in two. Not snapped, split, like it had been peeled apart. In the middle of the blessing, the windows upstairs exploded outward. All at once, not inward, as if something was trying to get in. Outward, as if something was escaping. Brennan left immediately. 2 nights later, Evelyn called. Gross answered on the second ring. She didn't greet him, didn't ask how things were. She just said, I've had dreams. It's not done. You need to leave that house. All of you. Burn what she drew. Do not let her speak again in that voice. He started to ask why, but the line went dead. They burned the drawings that night. Every spiral, every map, every page of Janet's sleep writings. But the fire stank of sulfur. It spat blue flames and hissed like it was alive. One of the pages refused to catch. No matter how long they held it in the fire, it curled but never burned. That page had only one thing written on it. I am the gate. That night, Janet spoke again. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. The others were asleep on the floor. Gross sat up when he saw her. She looked directly at him and mouthed a phrase. He couldn't hear it, but something in his bones understood. She said, You opened it. He rose to reach for her, but her body lifted, not violently, not flailing. Calmly, like something was gently pulling her upward. Her back arched, her arms spread, and then the sound came, a low droning hum, like 1,000 whispers all being sucked into a tunnel. The room dimmed, as though the air itself was losing color. The walls began to ripple. Not crack, not shake, ripple, like water disturbed by something rising beneath it. Gross screamed for Peggy. She rushed in. So did the others. But by the time they got there, Janet had fallen limp to the floor, eyes rolled back, mouth flecked with foam. She wasn't breathing. They called an ambulance. The medics arrived, stabilized her, and rushed her to the hospital. She would survive. But doctors still couldn't explain the seizure, the oxygen deprivation, the markings that appeared on her back like claws. When Janet awoke, her first words were, He didn't come through, but he's still inside. Janet was released from the hospital after 3 days under observation. Doctors blamed stress, perhaps epilepsy or dissociative episodes. None of them could explain the claw-like marks that scabbed over her back, or the fever that spiked in her sleep but vanished every morning. She didn't speak much after coming home. She'd sit at the kitchen table, tracing spirals in the condensation on the windowpane with a distant expression. When asked if she remembered anything, she shook her head slowly, but Gross knew better. She wasn't being honest. Or maybe she wasn't allowed to be. The house seemed quiet at first, as if the chaos had receded. There were no knocks, no floating furniture, no voices. For the first time in over a year, 284 Green Street felt like a home again. That peace lasted exactly 1 week. Then, without warning, the downstairs hallway began to reek of burning earth. Not smoke, not chemicals. Soil. Warm, wet, fresh soil, like the ground had just been dug up. The scent came and went in waves, never tied to weather or movement. Gross recorded everything, but there were no temperature shifts, no EMF readings, no rational explanations. Janet began sleepwalking again. This time, instead of standing in hallways, she'd curl up in the corner beneath the stairs, whispering to herself. Once, Johnny found her there, curled like a doll, muttering the same words. "The door never closes. It just forgets you." That same night, Gross made the decision to dig beneath the house. He didn't tell anyone, just waited until dark, took a shovel, and crept beneath the stairs into the small crawl space that sat behind the foundation wall. He was convinced, had to believe, that something physical had been buried. That maybe, if he could find it, this would all make sense. He dug for 3 hours in silence, save for the scraping of metal against earth, and then he found something. At first it looked like a stone, oval-shaped, but as he wiped away the dirt, it was unmistakable. It was a carved effigy, primitive, worn, a face, not human, with no eyes and an open, screaming mouth. The symbol of 3 spirals was etched into its forehead. It was cold, unnaturally cold, as if it had been buried in ice, not earth. He brought it into the kitchen and laid it on the table. That was his first mistake. The moment it crossed the threshold, Janet screamed upstairs. Not a normal scream, a sound of panic, raw terror, and recognition. "He's in it! He's in it! You brought him back!" Before anyone could stop her, she ran downstairs, grabbed the effigy, and hurled it into the fireplace. The flames roared, higher than they ever had before, licking the mantel, casting flickering shadows across the walls. The effigy cracked once, then again, and then it split, not in two, but open. A seam along its center widened, revealing not hollow stone, but pulsing, blackened flesh. It bled. A thick, black ichor oozed from the opening, coating the coals, hissing and spitting like it hated the fire. The flames didn't consume it. They bent around it, protected it, and then Janet collapsed. She was unconscious for 2 days. Gross stayed by her side, watching, waiting, listening. She moaned in her sleep, cried out. At one point, her voice shifted again, not guttural this time, but high and melodic, like someone mimicking a song from centuries ago. Peggy was near collapse herself. She wanted it all gone. The tapes, the notes, the footage, but Gross refused. "We're close," he kept saying, "to understanding, to stopping it." But even he didn't believe that anymore. On the 3rd night, Janet woke up. Her eyes were clearer. She seemed calm. "I think he's done with me," she said. Gross leaned in. "What do you mean?" She looked at him. "He found another way. Another door." Later that week, Playfair received a call from a family in a neighboring estate. Their daughter, Sophie, had begun experiencing night terrors, hearing voices in the walls, furniture moving, scribbling spirals into her homework. She had never met Janet, never been near Green Street. It had spread. The haunting, whatever it was, wasn't tied to a house, or even a person. It had used Janet, yes, used trauma as a vessel. But the gate? It had never been physical. It had always been emotional. Every scream, every ounce of fear, every memory of pain. That was the door. And now it had walked through. The Hodgson family eventually moved. The council relocated them to another part of London. The new house remained still, lifeless in the way most homes are meant to be. But Janet never truly recovered. The voice never came back. The knock stopped. But at night, when the wind was just right, Peggy swore she could still hear something moving inside the walls. Gross continued his research, but kept the Enfield files locked away. Too dangerous, he said. Not because of the ridicule, but because of what they represented. Proof that something exists beyond death, and it's not kind. Not confused. Not residual. Something alive. And it's watching. In 2003, shortly before his death, Gross mailed a sealed envelope to a university professor in Scotland. The envelope contained one thing: a photograph of the split effigy taken before it was destroyed. On the back, he had written 5 words. It followed us. It waits still. To this day, Janet refuses interviews. She once appeared on a talk show in her 20s, but halfway through the segment, she fell silent and began tracing spirals on the table with her finger. She never returned to public life after that. The house at 284 Green Street still stands. Tenants have come and gone. Some stay for years. Others flee within weeks. When asked why, they never have the same story. Just one shared phrase: "Something's wrong with the walls." And sometimes, late at night, if you're passing by the old Enfield house, you might hear it too, deep behind the bricks. A faint knocking, like something patiently waiting on the other side. Not angry, just eager. What was hiding behind the Enfield Horror? Something older than death. Something that wears your pain like a mask. And once it finds its way in, it never truly leaves. If you think the Enfield haunting ended, think again. What began in a small London home may have been just a glimpse into something far more ancient and insidious. Like, if you're still listening. Subscribe if you're not afraid to know what really hides in the dark. And comment below: "I heard the knocking too."